When did your best friend's success depend on your complete failure? I was staring at my rejection email from Princeton when Mara texted me a screenshot of her acceptance letter. The timing felt cruel, but I pushed down the bitterness and called her immediately to congratulate. She answered on the first ring, breathless with excitement. Can you believe it? We're both going to be in New Jersey next year. I didn't correct her, didn't tell her my application had been denied. Instead, I listened to her talk about dorm assignments and class schedules while my own rejection letter glowed on my laptop screen. Something felt wrong about the timing, but I convinced myself I was just being paranoid and jealous. That night, I applied to Rutgers as my backup plan and tried to be happy for my best friend since kindergarten. The scholarship rejection from the Harmon Foundation came next, and again, Mara called within hours to tell me she'd won it. $20,000 for academic excellence. I'd had a higher GPA than her since sophomore year, 4.2 to her 3.9, but she'd gotten the award I'd been counting on to afford any college at all. My parents made just enough that I didn't qualify for need-based aid, but not nearly enough to pay tuition out of pocket. Dad worked double shifts at the plant, and Mom cleaned houses on weekends, but we were still barely scraping by. I sat at dinner that night pushing food around my plate while they talked about community college options, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Mara posted photos on Instagram that same evening, holding an oversized check at the foundation's office, and I noticed something in the background that made my stomach turn. The man standing behind her in the photo was Dennis Harmon, founder of the Scholarship Fund, and he had his hand on her shoulder in a way that seemed too familiar. I zoomed in on my phone, studying his face, and recognized him from somewhere else. It took me 3 hours of scrolling through old photos before I found it. A Christmas party at Mara's house 2 years ago, where this same man had been talking to her parents in their kitchen, looking very comfortable in their home. I screenshot both photos and started a folder on my laptop, not sure what I was documenting yet, but feeling that same wrong sensation growing stronger. When I asked Mara about knowing Dennis Harmon personally, she got defensive and changed the subject fast. My interview for the Westfield summer internship program went perfectly. The director told me I was exactly what they were looking for: strong portfolio, excellent recommendations, mature beyond my years. She said I'd hear back within the week, and I left feeling hopeful for the first time in months. 5 days later, I got the rejection email at the exact same moment Mara texted me that she'd been accepted to the program. The same program she'd called pointless just 2 weeks earlier when I'd told her I was applying. The same program she'd said wasn't worth her time because she wanted to travel that summer instead. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes, watching her celebration texts roll in, and something shifted in my brain from confusion to certainty that this wasn't coincidence anymore. I started tracking everything in a spreadsheet that night. Every opportunity I'd applied for, every rejection I'd received, and every success Mara had announced shortly after. The pattern went back further than I'd realized. The debate team captain position I'd lost by 1 vote last year, with Mara winning instead. The art show where my piece had been rejected while hers was featured, even though our teacher had told me privately mine was stronger. The lead role in the spring musical that I'd been promised before Mara suddenly auditioned and got cast. 16 instances over 3 years where I'd been passed over and she'd been selected, always with timing that felt calculated. I sat back from my laptop at 2 a.m, my hands shaking, and wondered if I was losing my mind or uncovering something real. The next day at school, I watched Mara differently. Noticed how she asked detailed questions about my plans, my applications, my interview schedules, how she'd show up to things she'd previously said she wasn't interested in, right after I'd mentioned applying. During lunch, she asked what colleges I was still considering, and I lied, said I was thinking about schools in California. Her face did this micro-expression thing, relief mixed with something else, and she immediately started talking about how California was too far, how I'd hate being away from home, how the schools there weren't as good as people thought. I smiled and nodded while filming her under the table with my phone, capturing her discouraging me from opportunities she thought were real. That weekend, I told Mara I'd been accepted to a prestigious summer program in Boston that didn't actually exist. I created fake emails, a fake acceptance letter, even a fake website for the program using a free site builder. Then I waited. Within 3 days, she mentioned casually that she'd also applied to a program in Boston and was waiting to hear back. I felt sick and vindicated at the same time. She was monitoring what I did and copying my applications, but that didn't explain how she kept getting accepted while I got rejected. Someone had to be actively working to ensure I failed while she succeeded, and I needed to figure out who and why before my entire future disappeared. I went through Mara's Instagram again, this time going back years, and found more photos of Dennis Harmon at her family events. Birthday parties, graduation celebrations, holiday dinners. He wasn't just a family friend, he was deeply embedded in their lives. I searched his name online and discovered he sat on the boards of 7 different organizations in our area. The Harmon Foundation that gave out scholarships, the Westfield Youth Council that ran the internship program, the Community Arts Alliance that juried the art show, Princeton's local alumni interview committee. Every single opportunity I'd been rejected from had Dennis Harmon's name attached to it somewhere in the organizational structure. I screenshot everything and added it to my growing folder of evidence. On Monday, I told Mara I was applying for early admission to Columbia. Another lie, another test. I gave her specific details about my application essay, my recommendations, my submission timeline. She listened with that concerned friend expression she'd perfected, telling me not to get my hopes up because Columbia was so competitive. 2 days later, I saw her in the college counselor's office with a Columbia brochure in her hands. Our counselor, Mrs. Brennan, had told me just last week that Mara wasn't interested in any New York schools. I waited until Mara left, then knocked on Mrs. Brennan's door and asked directly if Mara had just submitted a Columbia application. Mrs. Brennan looked uncomfortable and said she couldn't discuss other students' applications, which was answer enough. I spent 3 days building a fake application portal that looked exactly like Columbia's real one, used the same fonts, same layout, same color scheme, created a login page that captured whatever username and password someone entered. Then I casually mentioned to Mara that I'd been checking my application status obsessively and showed her the fake portal on my phone. "I'm so anxious about it," I said, watching her eyes track the URL at the top of my screen. That night, my fake portal logged an access attempt. Someone had tried to log in using my name and a password that was almost right, just 2 characters off from my actual password. The IP address traced back to a location 3 blocks from Mara's house. The next morning, I confronted her in the parking lot before school. "Why are you trying to hack my college applications?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my heart hammering. She went pale, then red, then started crying. The tears looked real, but everything about her looked fake to me now. She swore she didn't know what I was talking about, that I was being paranoid, that our friendship meant everything to her. I pulled out my phone and showed her the login attempt logs and watched her face cycle through denial, panic, and finally something cold I'd never seen before. "You're making a huge mistake," she said quietly. "Some things are bigger than you understand." I asked what that meant, and she walked away without answering. In English class, she sat on the opposite side of the room instead of next to me. At lunch, she ate with the theater kids instead of at our usual table. By the end of the day, 3 different people had asked me if Mara and I were fighting, and I realized she was already controlling the narrative, positioning herself as the victim before I could tell anyone what I'd discovered. I went home and wrote down everything I knew, every piece of evidence I'd collected, and started planning how to prove what was happening to me without sounding paranoid or vindictive. That night, I got an email from Rutgers Admissions saying there had been irregularities with my application, and they needed to schedule a phone interview to verify some information. My stomach dropped. I'd been accepted to Rutgers months ago. This was the only school I'd gotten into, my only backup plan, and now suddenly, there were problems. I called the admissions office immediately, but they were closed. I barely slept, running through scenarios of what could go wrong, what accusations might be coming, how I could defend myself against attacks I couldn't see. The next morning, I called the second they opened and got transferred 4 times before reaching someone who could help. The admissions coordinator, a woman named Patricia, sounded uncomfortable. She said they'd received an anonymous email claiming I'd plagiarized portions of my application essay and fabricated some of my extracurricular activities. "We take these allegations very seriously," she said, "but we also want to give you a chance to respond before making any decisions." I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked her to forward me the email so I could see exactly what I was being accused of, and she hesitated before agreeing. The email arrived 10 minutes later, and reading it made me physically nauseous. Someone had taken real details from my life and twisted them just enough to make me look like a liar. The email claimed I'd never actually volunteered at the animal shelter, even though I had 2 years of documented hours. Said my essay about my grandmother's immigration story was stolen from a published article, even though it was my actual grandmother's actual story. Listed 3 teachers who would supposedly confirm I'd been dishonest, except when I checked, all 3 were teachers who'd retired or left the district and couldn't be easily reached. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what they were doing, making accusations specific enough to sound credible, but hard enough to disprove that the investigation itself would be damaging. I screenshot the email and added it to my evidence folder, then started drafting a response with documentation for every single claim. I spent the entire weekend gathering proof, found photos of me at the animal shelter with timestamps, got letters from my supervisors there, compiled sign-in sheets with my name and signature. Tracked down the original college essay I'd written and the notes from my interview with my grandmother, complete with her handwritten corrections in the margins. Called each of the 3 teachers mentioned, and 2 of them were confused about why their names were being used since they'd never said anything negative about me. The 3rd teacher, Mr. Phillips, didn't answer his phone, but his wife told me he was traveling in Europe and wouldn't be back for 3 weeks. I documented everything and sent it to Patricia with a detailed timeline, then waited. On Monday, Mara wasn't at school. She wasn't there on Tuesday either. Her Instagram went private, and when I texted asking if she was okay, I got no response. I tried calling and it went straight to voicemail. Her parents' cars were in their driveway when I drove past after school, but no one answered when I knocked. I stood on their porch feeling stupid and desperate, and noticed their Ring doorbell camera pointed right at me. I looked directly into it and said, "I know what you're doing, and I'm not going to let you destroy my future." Then I walked back to my car, hands shaking, wondering if I'd just made everything worse. Wednesday morning, I got called to the principal's office. My stomach was already twisting before I walked in and saw both my parents sitting there with Principal Davis and the school counselor. Dad's face was gray, and Mom had been crying. Principal Davis gestured for me to sit and then slid a piece of paper across the desk. "These are serious accusations," he said. "We need to hear your side." The paper was a printed email from a concerned student, claiming I'd been harassing Mara for months, stalking her social media, spreading rumors about her family, and making threats. The email included edited screenshots of texts that looked like they came from my number, saying things I'd never said, twisted and manipulated to make me sound unhinged and dangerous. I couldn't speak for a full minute, just stared at the fake messages on the page, trying to understand how someone had made them look so real. My number, my name at the top, but words I'd never typed. Finally, I found my voice and told them everything. The pattern of rejections, the Princeton acceptance, the scholarship, the internship, Dennis Harmon's connection to everything, the fake Columbia portal, the attempt to sabotage my Rutgers admission. I watched their faces shift from concern to skepticism to something that looked like pity. Principal Davis stopped me halfway through and said, "Do you have any proof of these claims?" I pulled out my phone and started showing them the spreadsheet, the photos, the login attempts, the IP addresses, but I could see they didn't believe me. "This sounds like a lot of speculation," the counselor said gently. "Sometimes when we're under stress about college admissions, we can start seeing patterns that aren't really there." Mom was looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was worried about my mental health. Dad just looked tired and disappointed. I felt panic rising in my throat and pulled up the email about the Rutgers accusations, showed them how someone was actively trying to destroy my chances. Principal Davis read it and frowned. "Did you plagiarize your application?" he asked directly. "No," I shouted, louder than I meant to. "That's my whole point. Someone is making false accusations to ruin my admission." The room went quiet, and I realized how I must sound to them, desperate and paranoid. They suspended me for 3 days pending investigation into the harassment claims. I wasn't allowed on school property, wasn't allowed to contact Mara or her family in any way, and had to surrender my phone so they could examine my messages. I sat in the parking lot afterward, crying so hard I couldn't see, while my parents tried to figure out what to say to me. Dad finally asked, "Did you really threaten her?" And the fact that he had to ask destroyed something inside me. "No," I whispered. "I've never threatened anyone. She's setting me up." Mom suggested we get me some help to talk through these feelings, and I realized they thought I was having a breakdown, that I was the problem, that everything I'd discovered was a delusion brought on by college rejection stress. At home, I logged into my laptop and downloaded everything from my evidence folder onto a USB drive before they could take my computer too. Printed out the most important documents and hid them in my room. Then I started searching for lawyers who specialized in defamation or harassment cases, knowing my parents couldn't afford one but desperate for any option. Most law firms wanted retainers of $5,000 or more just to consult. I found one lawyer, Thomas Brennan, who offered free initial consultations, and I filled out his online form with a summary of everything happening. He called me back within 2 hours, which seemed fast, and his voice sounded interested but cautious when I explained the situation. "This is complex," he said after I'd gone through the whole timeline. "You're alleging a conspiracy involving a prominent local philanthropist and multiple educational institutions. That's not something we can prove easily, and making accusations against someone like Dennis Harmon could open you up to a lawsuit." I felt my hope deflating but pushed forward. What if I can prove it? What if I can show the pattern and his connection to everything? Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Even if you can show correlation, proving causation and intent is much harder. But send me everything you have. Let me review it and I'll tell you if I think there's a case worth pursuing." I sent him the entire folder and spent the rest of the day refreshing my email, waiting for his response. The suspension turned into a nightmare. I wasn't allowed to explain to anyone why I was home, so rumors spread that I'd had a mental breakdown or done something terrible. People from school texted me asking what happened, and I couldn't respond because my parents had my phone. I used my laptop to check social media and saw posts from Mara's friends calling me jealous and unstable, saying I'd always been weird about her success. Someone started a rumor I'd tried to physically attack her. Another rumor said I'd been cheating on all my applications and got caught. By the second day, the story had evolved into me being expelled permanently, even though that wasn't true. I felt erased and rewritten into a villain in real time. Thomas Brennan emailed on the 3rd day. His message was careful and lawyer-like, but the core was clear. He saw the pattern I'd documented. He agreed it was suspicious. But he said proving anything in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and risky, especially against someone with Dennis Harmon's resources and connections. However, he wrote, there may be another approach. If we can find direct evidence of coordination, something concrete that shows active sabotage rather than just correlation, we might be able to pressure them into backing down without going to trial. You need a confession or documentation that proves intent. I read that last sentence 10 times, feeling something click into place. I needed someone to admit what they'd done. I needed them to tell me directly. I got my phone back when the suspension ended, and the first thing I saw was a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or it gets worse. This is your only warning." I screenshot it immediately and forwarded it to Thomas, who called me within minutes. "Do not respond to that," he said firmly. "This is good for us. Someone is worried about what you're finding. That means you're close to something real." He told me to document every threat, every strange contact, every unusual occurrence. They're escalating because they're scared. That's when people make mistakes. I hung up feeling both terrified and energized. Someone powerful was threatened by me, which meant I wasn't crazy. It meant I'd been right all along. At school, I walked through hallways where people whispered and stared. My locker had been vandalized with the word psycho in permanent marker. In the bathroom, I overheard two girls talking about how sad it was that I'd completely lost it over college rejections. I went to my classes and pretended everything was normal while my insides twisted. Mara was back, surrounded by supportive friends, playing the victim perfectly. She didn't look at me once all day. After school, I sat in my car and cried until I couldn't anymore, then drove to the public library to use their computers because I didn't trust my home internet anymore. I created a new email address and started searching for anyone else who'd been in my situation. Posted in college admission forums asking if anyone had experienced systematic rejections and suspicious patterns. Joined local community boards and searched for mentions of Dennis Harmon. Found articles about the Harmon Foundation's scholarship programs and started reading through years of recipient names. Something jumped out at me on the third page of search results. An article from 6 years ago about a student named Diana Cortez who'd been awarded the Harmon Scholarship. And in the photo, she was standing with Dennis Harmon and a couple I didn't recognize. The caption identified them as the Harmon family, including his daughter Mara. My vision went blurry. I read the caption 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Dennis Harmon celebrating with scholarship recipient Diana Cortez, alongside his wife and daughter Mara. Daughter. Mara was Dennis Harmon's daughter, not my best friend from kindergarten whose parents I knew well. The daughter of the man who controlled every opportunity I'd been denied. Everything crashed into place. The years of friendship, the careful questions about my plans, the coordinated rejections. She'd been placed in my life to monitor me, to compete with me, to ensure I always failed while she succeeded. Our entire friendship was a lie built to guarantee her success at the cost of mine. I sat frozen in the library, staring at the screen, feeling my entire childhood rewrite itself. Every sleepover, every shared secret, every moment I'd thought we were genuinely close. She'd been reporting back to her father the whole time. I thought about the people I'd thought were her parents, the couple whose house I'd spent countless hours in, and realized I'd never seen any legal documents or official papers connecting them to Mara. They'd been a front, a cover story to get her close to me. But why? Why me specifically? What had I done to deserve being targeted like this? I searched my own name next to Dennis Harmon's and found something that made my hands shake. A news article from 17 years ago about a lawsuit. Harmon Industries had been sued by a former employee named Catherine Morrison for wrongful termination and sexual harassment. The employee had won a substantial settlement, and the article mentioned she'd used part of the money to start a college fund for her infant daughter. My mother's name was Catherine. Her maiden name was Morrison. She'd worked at Harmon Industries before I was born. She'd never talked about it, never mentioned any lawsuit, never told me anything about that part of her life. I called her immediately. "Mom, did you work for Dennis Harmon?" I asked the second she answered. Silence. Then, "Where did you hear that name?" Her voice was tight, scared. "Just answer me. Did you sue him?" More silence. Then she said, "Come home right now. We need to talk." I drove home doing 15 over the speed limit, my brain spinning. Everything made horrible sense now. This wasn't about me. This was about revenge against my mother. Dennis Harmon had been systematically destroying my future for years as payback for losing a lawsuit decades ago, and he'd used his own daughter, planted in my life from childhood, to do it. Mom was waiting in the living room when I got home, and she looked 10 years older than she had that morning. Dad was there too, and they both looked like they'd been crying. "Sit down," Mom said, her voice shaking. I sat, and she started talking. She'd been Dennis Harmon's executive assistant 18 years ago. He'd promoted her quickly, given her increasing responsibilities, made her feel valued and important. Then he'd started making advances. Inappropriate comments, unwanted touches, eventually cornering her in his office and assaulting her. When she'd reported it to HR, they'd offered her money to keep quiet. When she'd refused and threatened legal action, they'd fired her and spread rumors that destroyed her reputation in the industry. "I was pregnant with you when the trial happened," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "The stress almost caused a miscarriage. The lawyers tried to make me sound unstable, said I was making false accusations for attention. But I had emails, recordings, witnesses. We won. The settlement was enough to pay off debt and start your college fund, but I was blacklisted from corporate work. That's why I've been cleaning houses all these years. No company would hire me after I sued Dennis Harmon." She looked at me with devastation in her eyes. "I thought he'd moved on. I never imagined he'd go after you. I'm so sorry. This is my fault." I felt rage boil up inside me, white hot and consuming. "How long have you known?" I asked. "When did you realize Mara was his daughter?" Mom shook her head. "I didn't. I swear I didn't know until right now. I never met his family. I avoided anything to do with him for years. When you became friends with a girl named Mara in kindergarten, it never occurred to me. The last name was different. The parents she lived with were different. I had no idea. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and showed me the same article I'd found. You texted me about this. I looked it up. That's when I saw the photo. That's when I realized. Dad spoke for the first time. We're going to fix this. I'm calling every lawyer in the state if I have to. He can't do this to our daughter because of something that happened before she was born. But his voice cracked, and I could hear how powerless he felt. Dennis Harmon had money, connections, institutional power. We had nothing but the truth and years of documented revenge. I thought about Thomas Brennan saying I needed direct evidence of intent, and an idea formed. Terrible and risky, but maybe the only chance I had. I need to talk to Mara, I said. Both parents started to protest, but I cut them off. She doesn't know I figured it out yet. If I confront her and record it, if I can get her to admit what they've been doing and why, that's the evidence we need. Mom looked horrified. That's too dangerous. If they realize you know, they might escalate. I thought about the threatening text message. They're already escalating. This is only going to get worse if we don't do something now. I have to try. Dad looked at Mom, and something passed between them. Finally, he nodded. We do this carefully. We plan it out. And the second it feels unsafe, you walk away. I spent that night planning with Thomas Brennan on a three-way call with my parents. He explained how to create a legally admissible recording in our state, how to ask questions that would prompt clear admissions, how to protect myself if things went wrong. You need her to explicitly state that she's been sabotaging you on her father's orders, he said. Vague admissions won't be enough, and you need to keep her talking long enough to establish a pattern, not just one incident. I wrote out a script of questions and practiced with Dad playing Mara's role until my voice stopped shaking. The next morning, I texted Mara from a new number I'd set up specifically for this. I know who you really are. Meet me at Riverside Park after school, or I'm going to the police with everything I know. It was aggressive and potentially stupid, but I needed her rattled enough to make mistakes. She responded within 5 minutes. Who is this? I sent back. Someone who knows Dennis Harmon is your father. 3 p.m. at the North Pavilion. Come alone. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared 4 times before she finally responded. Okay. I forwarded the exchange to Thomas and my parents, then spent the rest of the school day unable to focus on anything except what was about to happen. I got to Riverside Park 40 minutes early and set up my phone in a hollowed-out section of the pavilion's stone wall, positioned to capture the whole meeting area. Tested the audio 3 times to make sure it would pick up conversation clearly. Thomas had coached me to stand in specific positions that would keep both our faces in frame. I'd worn a jacket with a second recording device sewn into the lining, backup in case anything happened to the phone. At 2:55, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on them. At 2:58, Mara walked up the path toward me, and even from a distance, I could see her face was different. Not the sweet, concerned friend I'd known, something harder and colder underneath. She stopped about 6 feet away from me, arms crossed. How did you find out? She asked. No preamble, no pretense. I kept my voice steady. Does it matter? What matters is what you've been doing to me for years. Why don't you start by telling me why, Mara Harmon? She flinched at her real last name. It's not what you think, she started, but I cut her off. Then explain it to me. Explain why your father has been systematically destroying every opportunity I've applied for. Explain why you've been pretending to be my best friend while reporting my plans back to him. Explain what I did to deserve this. My voice was getting louder, and I forced myself to calm down. Anger wouldn't get me the confession I needed. Mara looked away, and when she looked back, her eyes were wet. You didn't do anything. It was never about you. I waited, letting the silence stretch until she felt compelled to fill it. Your mom destroyed my dad's reputation, cost him millions in the settlement and legal fees, made him look like a predator in the media. He built everything back up, but he never forgot. When I was old enough to understand, he told me about Catherine Morrison and what she'd done to him. He said people who tried to destroy others deserved to have it returned tenfold. He found out your mom had a daughter my age, and he decided you'd pay for what she did. So, he placed you in my life to sabotage me? I pushed, needing her to say it explicitly. Mara shook her head. Not placed exactly. We moved to your school district when I was 5. My parents, the ones you know, they're my aunt and uncle. They agreed to raise me publicly so my real identity stayed hidden. Dad said it had to be long-term, patient. He needed me to become your closest friend so you'd trust me completely. Then when it mattered, when it was college and jobs and your real future, I'd be positioned to feed him information and he could make sure you failed while I succeeded. She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was a reasonable business strategy instead of a decade-long psychological warfare campaign against a child. And you just went along with it? I asked, feeling sick. For 10 years you pretended to care about me, and it was all fake? Mara's face hardened. You don't understand what it's like being Dennis Harmon's daughter. Everything is about legacy, strategy, winning. He told me this was my first real test. If I could execute a long-term plan successfully, stay disciplined, never break cover, then I'd proven I was worthy of taking over his businesses someday. This was my training. She actually looked proud. I never slipped once. You never suspected. That's how good I am. The casual cruelty of it staggered me. I'd been a training exercise, a decade of my life manipulated as practice for her future corporate warfare. What about the other stuff? I asked, trying to keep her talking. The fake harassment accusations, the plagiarism claims to Rutgers? Mara nodded. That was the final phase. Dad said to make sure you not only failed but looked unstable and dishonest so you couldn't recover easily. Discredit you completely. The doctored text messages weren't hard. There are apps for that. The Rutgers email was trickier, but Dad has connections in their admissions department who could make sure it got taken seriously. She was giving me everything, every admission I needed, and she didn't even realize it. She thought she'd already won, that my knowing changed nothing because I had no power against her father. Do you feel anything? I asked, genuinely curious. Guilt? Regret? Did any of our friendship mean anything real to you? Mara thought about it, and I could see her trying to find something genuine in herself. Sometimes it was fun, she admitted. You're actually interesting, smarter than most people. There were moments I forgot it was an assignment and just enjoyed hanging out. But that doesn't change what I had to do. Dad's happiness, his sense of justice, that comes first. Your mom tried to destroy him. Now you're destroyed instead. That's balance. The sociopathic logic of it was almost impressive. She'd been so thoroughly indoctrinated into her father's worldview that she couldn't see how insane it all was. I took a deep breath. What happens now? Mara shrugged. Now you get to live with the consequences. Rutgers will probably reject you once the investigation concludes. Your reputation at school is ruined. College prospects gone. Job recommendations poisoned. You'll spend years trying to dig yourself out of the hole we put you in. And by then, I'll be running Dad's companies and you'll be nobody. That's what happens when you cross Dennis Harmon's family. She checked her phone. I should go. My actual friends are waiting for me downtown. Thanks for the friendship, though, really. You taught me a lot about maintaining cover. She turned to walk away, and I let her take 3 steps before I spoke again. Mara? She turned back, curious. I walked over to the pavilion wall and pulled my phone out from its hiding spot, holding it up so she could see the screen. Recording. 18 minutes, 47 seconds. Her face went white. That was you being smart and disciplined, I said, my voice steady now, powerful. This is me being smarter. Every word you just said is documented. Your real identity, your father's plan, the systematic sabotage, the fake evidence, all of it, recorded and backed up to 3 different cloud accounts your father can't access. I watched panic replace her smug confidence. You just gave me everything I need to destroy both of you. She lunged for my phone, but I stepped back and she stumbled. You can't use that, she said desperately. It's illegal to record someone without consent. I smiled. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to record a conversation. I consented when I set up this meeting. Everything is legally admissible. Thomas Brennan had been very clear about this point. Your father spent years trying to ruin me. Now I have a confession from his daughter admitting to conspiracy, fraud, harassment, and defamation. Let's see whose future gets destroyed. I sent the recording to Thomas and my parents while she watched, then looked back at her. Get out of here before I change my mind about going straight to the police. Mara ran. Actually ran down the park path and didn't look back. I stood there shaking, adrenaline finally crashing through my system, and realized I'd done it. I'd gotten what I needed. Thomas called within 3 minutes of receiving the recording, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. This is exactly what we needed. This is actionable. With this recording, we can file criminal complaints and civil suits. We can get restraining orders. Most importantly, we can use this to pressure them into backing down completely before it goes to trial. He started listing legal strategies, but I was barely listening, just feeling the weight of 10 years of manipulation, finally having an answer, a path forward, a chance at justice. At home, my parents listened to the recording together, Mom crying through the whole thing, Dad's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. When it finished, Dad looked at me with something I'd never seen before, pride mixed with fury, grief mixed with determination. No one does this to my daughter, he said quietly. No one. We called Thomas on speaker and spent 2 hours planning the next steps. File police reports for conspiracy to commit fraud and criminal harassment. Send cease and desist letters to Dennis Harmon and every institution he'd influenced. Submit the recording to Rutgers with a formal complaint about the fake plagiarism accusations. Contact the Harmon Foundation Board about scholarship fraud. Go public if necessary, but use that as leverage first to get what we actually wanted, my complete vindication and restoration. Thomas filed everything the next morning. By noon, Dennis Harmon's lawyers had called requesting an immediate meeting to discuss resolving this matter privately. We met in Thomas's office, our side of the table feeling tiny against 3 lawyers in expensive suits representing Harmon's interests. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Webb, spent 10 minutes trying to discredit the recording, claim Mara was confused or speaking hypothetically, suggest this was all a misunderstanding. Then Thomas played the recording again, and we all listened to Mara's voice saying, Dad said to make sure you not only failed but looked unstable and dishonest so you couldn't recover easily, discredit you completely. Patricia's face tightened. She asked for a private conference with her colleagues, and they stepped into the hallway for 15 minutes. When they came back, her tone had changed completely. "My client is prepared to offer a settlement," she said carefully. I looked at Thomas, and he nodded for me to speak. I'd been practicing this moment. "I want every false accusation retracted in writing. I want my Rutgers admission fully restored with a formal apology from the institution. I want recommendation letters from Dennis Harmon himself to 5 colleges of my choice. I want my college fund restored and expanded to cover 4 years of tuition, room, and board at any school I choose. I want restraining orders against Dennis Harmon, Mara, and anyone acting on their behalf. And I want a written confession from Dennis Harmon acknowledging what he did and why." Patricia shook her head immediately. "My client won't agree to a confession. That's too much exposure." Thomas leaned forward. "Then we go public with the recording and file criminal charges. Your client's daughter admits on tape to a decade-long conspiracy to destroy a teenager because her father lost a lawsuit 17 years ago. The media will love this story. Dennis Harmon's reputation will be permanently destroyed, and he'll face potential criminal charges. Or he agrees to our terms, we keep everything confidential, and he gets to move forward with his life. His choice." The lawyers looked at each other. Patricia made a phone call. 20 minutes later, they agreed to everything except the written confession. Instead, Dennis Harmon would record a video statement acknowledging his actions, to be held in escrow by Thomas, and released only if he violated any terms of the agreement. The settlement process took 3 weeks. Every day brought new documents to sign, new institutions to notify, new pieces of my life being restored. Rutgers sent a formal letter clearing me of all accusations and personally apologizing for their investigative process. Princeton reopened my application and conducted a new review, ultimately accepting me for the following fall. The Harmon Foundation Board, horrified by the recording, awarded me a full scholarship and quietly removed Dennis Harmon from their leadership. 5 different universities received glowing recommendation letters from Dennis Harmon, each one making me sound exceptional, and I knew every word must have killed him to write. My college fund grew to over $200,000, ensuring I could attend any school I chose without financial stress. The video confession came last. Dennis Harmon sat in a lawyer's office looking smaller than I'd imagined and spoke directly to camera. "I, Dennis Harmon, acknowledge that I engaged in systematic interference with the educational and career opportunities of someone because of a personal grievance against her mother. I placed my daughter in proximity to this person from childhood, with instructions to monitor and report her plans so I could ensure she experienced rejection and failure at critical junctures. This behavior was unethical, illegal, and caused significant harm to an innocent person. I take full responsibility for my actions and the actions of my daughter under my direction." His voice was flat, emotionless, but the words were clear and legally binding. Thomas locked the video in a security deposit box with instructions for release if the Harmons violated any part of our agreement. At school, Mara was gone. Withdrawn mid-semester, her aunt and uncle's house suddenly empty. I heard she'd been sent to a boarding school in Switzerland, far enough away that Dennis Harmon could pretend his daughter's sociopathic training program hadn't just blown up in his face. The rumors about me reversed almost overnight once the school administration quietly acknowledged there had been misunderstandings and false accusations. People who'd called me crazy suddenly wanted to know what really happened, but I didn't explain. Just smiled and said everything was handled, watching their frustrated curiosity with satisfaction. Principal Davis personally apologized to me in his office, and I accepted it with more grace than he deserved. My actual friends, the ones who'd stuck by me even when rumors made me look unhinged, got the real story. We sat in my living room, and I played them the recording. Watched their faces shift from disbelief to horror to rage on my behalf. 10 years, my friend Ashley kept saying. She pretended for 10 years. How is that even possible? I didn't have an answer except that some people were capable of anything when they were taught to value winning over humanity. We burned old photos of Mara that night, a small ritual that felt cathartic and final. The smoke carried away a decade of false friendship, and I felt lighter than I had in years. College acceptance letters started arriving. Princeton, Columbia, Stanford, Berkeley, all schools that had rejected me before suddenly finding space in their incoming classes. I chose Princeton because it felt right, because it was the first place that had denied me, and taking their acceptance now felt like reclaiming something stolen. The scholarship from the Harmon Foundation meant I'd graduate debt-free, another twist of irony I savored. Dennis Harmon's revenge plan had collapsed so completely that he was now funding my success. His own requirement that everything stay confidential meant he couldn't even publicly distance himself from me. He just had to watch me thrive using his money. Graduation day was surreal. I stood on stage as valedictorian, having reclaimed my GPA ranking after the school board reviewed years of grade calculations and found suspicious patterns in how certain opportunities had been allocated. My speech was about resilience, about fighting systems that tried to crush you, about refusing to accept other people's narratives about your worth. I saw my parents in the audience, both crying, and knew they understood every word was about what we'd survived together. Thomas Brennan came too, sitting in the back, and afterward told me I had a future in law if I ever wanted it. "You fight smart," he said. "That's rarer than you'd think." Mom and I talked a lot that summer about her experiences with Dennis Harmon. things she'd kept buried for 17 years. She'd been carrying guilt about the lawsuit, wondering if staying quiet would have been easier, if making noise had been worth the cost. Yes, I told her firmly. You fought back when he hurt you, and that gave me the blueprint to fight back when he came after me. You showed me that powerful people aren't invincible. That was worth everything. We went through old boxes of documents from her case, and she showed me the evidence she'd gathered, the meticulous documentation that had won her lawsuit. I realized I'd learned from her even without knowing it, that the spreadsheet of rejections and folder of screenshots were inherited strategies from a mother who'd survived her own battle. Princeton sent my roommate assignment in August, and I found myself hoping desperately that she'd be normal, real, someone I could actually trust. Her name was Zoe from Oregon, interested in environmental science and rock climbing. We talked on the phone before move-in day, and I found myself analyzing everything she said, looking for hidden motives or false notes. Therapy helped. My therapist, Dr. Reeves, reminded me that not everyone was performing a decade-long con, that most people were exactly who they appeared to be, that I could learn to trust again without being naive. It would take time, but I had time now. I had a future that was mine, not controlled by someone else's vendetta. Move-in day at Princeton felt like walking into a life I'd fought a war to reach. Dad carried boxes up 4 flights of stairs, refusing help, needing to do this physical labor as proof he'd gotten me here. Mom took photos of everything, documenting my dorm room, my face, the moment we'd won. Zoe turned out to be exactly who she seemed, genuinely kind and refreshingly uncomplicated. Her biggest concern was whether I minded her playing folk music at night, and the normalcy of that question made me want to cry. This was what friendship was supposed to be: easy, honest, uncalculated. 6 months into my freshman year, I got an email from Mara. Subject line, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for 10 minutes before opening. The message was long, rambling, claiming she'd been in therapy and realized how damaged her father had made her, how wrong everything they'd done was, how she wanted to apologize and maybe someday earn forgiveness. She said she'd cut contact with her father, was trying to build a real life separate from his influence, wanted to start over as a real person instead of a weapon he'd created. The email ended with, "You deserved better than what I did to you. You deserved a real friend, and I'm sorry I couldn't be that." I read it 3 times, looking for manipulation, but found only what seemed like genuine regret. I never responded. Not because I couldn't forgive, but because some betrayals were too fundamental to repair. She'd stolen 10 years of my life, poisoned my formative experiences, and I couldn't trust that any version of her was real. Maybe she'd changed. Maybe therapy had helped her find empathy. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I deleted the email and blocked her address, choosing to leave that chapter closed. Dr. Reeves said that was healthy, that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that I could release anger without letting the person who hurt me back into my life. My sophomore year, I started volunteering with a legal aid organization that helped students fight educational discrimination. I shared my story, carefully edited to protect privacy agreements, and found that it resonated with others who'd faced institutional failures or systematic sabotage. One girl had been blacklisted from internships after rejecting a professor's advances. One guy had been failed out of classes when he reported hazing. The patterns were everywhere once you knew to look for them, and I helped them document everything, taught them the strategies Thomas had taught me, connected them with resources they needed. Turning my trauma into tools that helped others felt like completing the circle, like Dennis Harmon's revenge had inadvertently created an advocate who would fight people like him. I'm finishing my junior year now. Princeton feels like home. I have actual friends I trust, and I'm on track for law school with recommendations from professors who know my real work, not manipulated versions of it. Mom keeps every newspaper clipping about honors I receive, building a new folder to replace the one documenting her lawsuit. Dad still works double shifts but seems lighter now, like seeing me succeed has healed something in him that was broken by watching me suffer. We're not rich, we'll never be in Dennis Harmon's world, but we won. We survived an attack from someone with infinite resources and came out stronger. Last week, I saw Dennis Harmon at a university fundraising event. He was there as a donor, trying to rebuild his reputation through philanthropy. Our eyes met across the room, and I watched him recognize me. Watched his face cycle through surprise, anger, fear. I smiled at him, calm and confident, and watched him look away first. He knows I have the video. Knows I could destroy him completely if he ever comes after me again. But more than that, he knows he failed. He spent 10 years and massive resources trying to crush me, and I'm standing here thriving. His daughter is estranged from him, his reputation damaged among people who know what happened, and the girl he tried to destroy is succeeding at the university he once got her rejected from. That's the real revenge. Not what I did to him, but what I built despite everything he did to me. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.